The Saturday morning sun spilled gold over Brookside Estates, glinting off spotless driveways and manicured lawns that looked like they'd been trimmed with scissors. The neighborhood was the kind of place where hedges stood at perfect 90-degree angles, and the homeowners association took more pride in appearances than in kindness. Elaine Harper sat on the front porch of her colonial-style home, savoring a rare, quiet morning. She wore a soft gray robe, her hair tied back, and a mug of peppermint tea warmed her hands. Her 6-year-old daughter, Ava, was sprawled on the sidewalk below, chalk dust clinging to her small brown fingers as she drew a crooked but colorful rainbow. "Don't forget the clouds, baby," Elaine called down with a smile. Ava looked up, grinning. "I'm making pink clouds. They're happy clouds." Elaine chuckled. Well, that's one way to do it. It had been a busy week in court, a high-profile fraud case that had kept her on the bench until late hours. Being a federal judge came with constant pressure, but this morning, all she wanted was to watch her daughter's joy and maybe bake cookies later. The faint sound of the community playground's squeaky swings floated in the air. It was just down the block, a little over 50 yards away. A few kids were already there, their laughter mixing with the chirping of sparrows. "Mommy, can I go to the swings for a bit?" Ava asked, bouncing to her feet. Elaine glanced at her watch. "Just for a few minutes. Stay where I can see you." Ava nodded and skipped toward the playground, pigtails bouncing, her stuffed bunny tucked under one arm. Elaine sipped her tea, eyes following her until she disappeared behind the slide. A minute passed. Then two. Elaine leaned forward in her chair, scanning the bright plastic playground equipment. She caught sight of a red ball rolling across the grass but not her daughter. She stood, her heartbeat quickening. "Ava," she called, stepping off the porch. No answer. She walked briskly toward the playground, her eyes darting to every corner. 2 boys were climbing the jungle gym, and a little girl was pushing a smaller one on the swing. Ava was nowhere. Her voice rose slightly. "Ava, come here right now." Still nothing. A prickle of cold anxiety crept up her spine. She checked behind the slide, then the row of bushes lining the edge of the playground. Empty. By now, her breathing had quickened. She turned toward a couple of nearby neighbors, a middle-aged man trimming his hedges and a woman walking a small dog. "Have you seen my daughter? 6 years old, pink dress, pigtails." The man hesitated, then lowered his voice to the woman beside him. "It's probably the HOA," he muttered. Elaine caught the words like a slap. "What did you just say?" she demanded. The woman's eyes flickered nervously. "Look, I don't know anything for sure. But the board's been talking about you. How you've been ignoring their notices about your door color and the flowers in your yard. And, well, Martin Hale's been saying someone needs to make an example." Elaine's pulse thundered in her ears. The HOA, she had dealt with their petty harassment for months. First, it was a letter saying the bright blue of her front door was out of character for the neighborhood. Then, complaints about the native wildflowers she'd planted instead of the standard petunias. The language in those notices had grown sharper over time, slipping in comments that weren't just about property aesthetics but about her. She had brushed them off. She was a judge, for heaven's sake, she wasn't about to be bullied over plants. But the idea that they could be behind her daughter's disappearance. That was something else entirely. Elaine didn't waste another second. She sprinted back to her porch, grabbed her phone, and called Ava's name again, her voice cutting across the quiet suburb. Her fingers hovered over the emergency dial button, but she paused. If the HOA was involved, she wasn't sure she could trust the local police. Her mind raced. Ava was just 6, too young to know how to get home on her own. Too young to fight back. Elaine's stomach twisted with dread, but her expression hardened into something else, resolve. If the HOA had taken her daughter, they had no idea who they were up against. And she was about to show them. The storage shed behind the Brookside Estates HOA clubhouse wasn't meant for people. It smelled faintly of mildew and gasoline, its single light bulb buzzing and flickering overhead. Dust floated in the stale air, and stacks of old lawn equipment, paint cans, and unused holiday decorations crowded the corners. In the center of the room, on a rickety folding chair, sat Ava. Her little legs dangled above the floor, her pink dress now smudged from the rough handling when she'd been grabbed near the playground. Her stuffed bunny, Mr. Flop, rested limply in her lap, its ear torn slightly. She clutched it as if squeezing it could make her mother appear. 3 adults loomed nearby. Martin Hale, the HOA president, stood with his hands in his pockets, leaning casually against a filing cabinet as if this were nothing more than a casual meeting. His pressed khaki pants and starched polo shirt were immaculate, not a wrinkle in sight. Beside him, Brenda Cross, the vice president, perched on the edge of a table. She was in her late 50s, with a stiff blonde bob and nails painted a glossy cherry red. Every few seconds, she tapped them against the wood, a sharp, impatient click click click. Frank Morris, the HOA treasurer, looked the most uncomfortable. His arms were crossed tightly over his chest, his eyes avoiding Ava's. Sweat dotted his forehead despite the cool air. Martin broke the silence first. "All right, here's the deal. We're not here to hurt you, sweetheart. We just need your mommy to listen for once." Ava blinked, confused. "Mommy listens." Brenda smirked, her lips curling with something between amusement and disdain. "Your mommy's been ignoring the rules. We asked her nicely to change her front door, fix the flowers, and follow the guidelines. But she thinks she's special." Frank muttered, "Brenda," but stopped when Martin shot him a look. Martin crouched down so his face was level with Ava's, his smile stiff and false. "When she sees you here, she'll realize she can't just ignore us. She'll fix the problems, and then you can go home." Ava's small brow furrowed. "Mommy says the flowers are for the bees. The bees need them." Brenda snorted. "The bees aren't paying HOA fees." Frank's jaw tightened. He stepped forward slightly. "Martin, I thought we were just going to send her a message, not this. This is kidnapping. A federal crime." Martin straightened up, his voice turning cold. "Relax. No one's going to press charges. We're the HOA, we're the authority here. We've handled disputes before, and we'll handle this one. By Monday, she'll give in, and the kid goes home. Simple." Frank shook his head but said nothing more. Ava hugged Mr. Flop tighter. Her mother had taught her not to talk to strangers, and these people didn't feel safe, not at all. Still, she remembered her mommy's words, "If you're ever in trouble, stay calm and pay attention." So she looked around. The shed had one door, no windows. A heavy padlock dangled from a hook nearby. The only other exit might have been the small vent near the ceiling, but it was far too high. She noticed the way Frank kept glancing at her, guilty, almost apologetic, and she filed that away in her mind. Martin checked his watch. "We'll give it a few hours. I'll call her around noon. Let her sweat a little first." Brenda crossed her legs, her tone dripping with smugness. "You know, maybe after this, she'll finally sell that house and move somewhere more fitting for her." Ava didn't fully understand the sting behind Brenda's words, but she could feel the meanness in them. She sat a little straighter, her chin lifting the way her mommy's did when she faced down a bully in court. "My mommy's not scared of you," Ava said quietly. Martin chuckled, though his eyes narrowed. "She will be." Frank looked away again. That was the moment Ava knew, if she had any chance of getting out before her mommy came, Frank might be the one to help her. Outside, the neighborhood remained blissfully unaware. The clubhouse lawn was perfectly trimmed, the tennis courts empty in the late morning heat, and not a single neighbor guessed that inside the shed, the HOA had crossed a line from petty rule enforcers to criminals. What they didn't know was that the woman they were trying to intimidate wasn't just another homeowner. She was a federal judge, and by the time the day was over, the HOA would realize just how big a mistake they'd made. Elaine stood in the center of her living room, the phone still pressed to her ear, her breathing slow and deliberate. She had just hung up with her contact at the U.S. Marshals Service, a man she'd worked with on multiple high-stakes cases. No hysterics. No begging. Just the facts. Her eyes were hard now, every ounce of fear burned away and replaced with steel. On the coffee table lay a thin stack of papers, the HOA's most recent violation notices. She'd kept every single one, not because she was worried about fines, but because she had a gut feeling their harassment might escalate. She just hadn't expected it to happen through her daughter. A voice on her porch broke her concentration. "Judge Harper." She opened the door to see a black SUV idling at the curb. 2 men and 2 women stepped out, each wearing tactical gear and the unmistakable gold star of the U.S. Marshals. The team leader, a tall man with close-cropped hair, stepped forward. "Ma'am, we're ready. Can you brief us?" Elaine didn't waste time. "My daughter, Ava Harper, 6 years old, pink dress, pigtails, was taken from the neighborhood playground about 30 minutes ago. I have credible reason to believe the Brookside Estates HOA is responsible. Their president, Martin Hale, has threatened me in the past, both verbally and in writing." The team leader nodded, his expression unreadable. Understood. Do you know where they might be holding her? Elaine pointed toward the tree-lined path that led deeper into the neighborhood. The clubhouse has an outbuilding, a storage shed behind it. It's secluded, easy to lock from the outside. The marshal's hand went to his radio. Bravo team, move on the clubhouse. Alpha, with me. Within seconds, the marshals spread out, two heading down the street toward the clubhouse, their movements quick but silent. Elaine walked with the lead pair, her judicial robe now draped over her arm. She hadn't planned to wear it today, but something in her wanted Martin Hale to see her in it when he realized exactly who he'd crossed. As they approached the clubhouse, curious neighbors peeked through blinds and cracked doors. Elaine could feel their eyes following her, but she didn't break stride. Every step closer felt like a tightening spring inside her chest. At the far end of the lawn, Martin Hale emerged from the clubhouse, his usual smug grin plastered across his face. He clearly thought he had the upper hand. Judge Harper, he called out mockingly, spreading his arms. I heard you were looking for me. Is this about the door? Color again, or... He stopped mid-sentence as the marshals closed in, their hands resting on the grips of their holstered weapons. Martin Hale, the team leader said, his voice firm, you are under arrest for kidnapping, unlawful detainment, conspiracy, and making threats against a federal judge. Martin blinked, then laughed incredulously. Kidnapping? You've got to be kidding. This is an HOA matter. You don't get to. Elaine's voice cut cleanly through the air. You kidnapped my daughter. I am a sitting federal judge. This is not an HOA matter. This is a federal crime. The laughter faded from Martin's face. His eyes flickered from Elaine to the marshals, then to the gathering crowd of neighbors. Brenda Cross appeared in the doorway behind him, her arms folded, her expression tight. You can't do this. Brenda shouted. We're the HOA. We have authority here. One of the marshals stepped past Martin toward the side of the clubhouse. Moments later, the metallic rattle of a padlock echoed across the lawn, followed by the sound of a door swinging open. From inside the shed came a small, trembling voice. Mommy. Elaine's heart leapt. She moved faster than she realized she could, brushing past Martin without a glance. Ava stood in the doorway of the shed, her eyes wide, clutching Mr. Flop to her chest. Elaine scooped her daughter into her arms, holding her close. I've got you, baby. You're safe now. The marshals moved quickly, cuffing Martin and Brenda while Frank Morris stood frozen, his hands raised in surrender. Frank muttered something about not wanting any part of this, but the team leader read him his rights anyway. Elaine turned to face them, her daughter still in her arms, her voice steady and sharp. You thought you were above the law. You thought intimidation would work. But today, you learn the law applies to everyone. The crowd of neighbors stood in stunned silence. Cameras from a few bold bystanders caught every moment. As the marshals loaded the arrested HOA board members into the SUV, Elaine walked home with Ava. She knew this wasn't over. There would be court dates, media attention, and a wave of public outrage. But for now, her daughter was safe, and that was all that mattered. What Martin Hale didn't realize yet was that the real trial was still to come, and Elaine would make sure justice was served. 3 months later, the media frenzy had not died down. If anything, it had intensified. The Brookside HOA kidnapping case had become a national headline, a perfect storm of suburban politics, racial prejudice, and raw criminal stupidity. The courthouse steps swarmed with reporters on the morning of the trial. Camera crews jostled for position, microphones thrust forward like spears, their owners shouting over each other. Judge Harper, how do you feel today? Will you be seeking the maximum penalty? Do you believe the HOA targeted you because of race? Elaine ignored them. She wasn't here to grandstand. This wasn't her courtroom, and she wasn't the one trying the case. That duty fell to federal prosecutor Dana Ortega, a sharp, unflinching woman who had handled organized crime syndicates before. Inside, the gallery was packed. Local residents filled the benches, some out of morbid curiosity, others because they still couldn't believe the HOA leaders had been foolish enough to abduct a federal judge's child. The defendants sat at the table to the right. Martin Hale, still with that perfectly pressed shirt, but his posture now slouched, his smirk long gone. Brenda Cross, visibly bitter, whispering sharply to her attorney between every statement. Frank Morris, looking more like a man awaiting a colonoscopy than a trial, glancing nervously toward the exit every few minutes. The prosecution laid out the facts with clinical precision. Security camera footage from a nearby house showed Martin leading Ava away from the playground. A neighbor's audio recording caught Brenda bragging about making the judge sweat. Even Frank's own text messages, seized through a warrant, revealed his nervous acknowledgement that they were crossing a line. Dana Ortega didn't pull punches. She painted the defendants not as bumbling amateurs but as people with intent. They didn't just act in the heat of the moment, Ortega told the jury. They planned this. They targeted a child. They abused their position of authority in the community to intimidate and punish someone for daring to stand up to them. And in doing so, they committed one of the most serious crimes in our legal system, the kidnapping of a minor. Elaine sat in the front row with Ava, her arm wrapped protectively around her daughter. Ava had been prepped for weeks by child advocates, and while she was too young to testify formally, her presence alone spoke volumes. The defense tried to spin the story as a misunderstanding. Martin's attorney argued that they had simply been keeping Ava safe until her mother could discuss compliance issues. The jury's collective eye roll was almost audible. When the prosecution rested, the defense had little left but weak denials and claims of community authority. It took the jury less than 2 hours to return. The foreperson stood, voice steady. We find Martin Hale guilty on all counts. We find Brenda Cross guilty on all counts. We find Frank Morris guilty on all counts. Martin's jaw clenched. Brenda gasped, her face turning red. Frank just closed his eyes, as if resigning himself to fate. Judge Matthews, who presided over the case, wasted no time. Sentencing was immediate. Mr. Hale, Matthews said, voice grave, you will serve 20 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Brenda's sentence was 15 years. Frank, having cooperated with investigators and testified against the others, received 5 years. When the gavel came down, the sound echoed like a door slamming shut on the HOA's reign of intimidation. Outside, the press surged forward again. Elaine stopped just long enough to make one statement, her daughter's small hand clasped firmly in hers. You can't hide behind titles, boards, or community rules when you commit crimes, she said, her voice steady but fierce. Justice doesn't care about your status, and neither do I. As the cameras flashed, Ava tugged at her mother's sleeve. Mommy. Elaine looked down. I told them you weren't scared, Ava whispered, smiling. Elaine's heart softened. She kissed the top of her daughter's head. And you were right, baby. We don't get scared. We get justice. They walked away from the chaos together, leaving the courthouse steps, and the HOA's crumbling power, behind them.